This video is a direct answer to a question that I got in my comments for my video about the MSR WindPro, which was, would you recommend the MSR WindPro versus the MSR WhisperLite Universal? I don't have an MSR WhisperLite Universal. I have an MSR WhisperLite International. So I'll just go over a few of the main differences and kind of extrapolate the difference between these two stoves and where you might want to use or choose one versus the other. The WindPro is really one of my favorite stoves. It's very compact and it's quite light for what it can do. And based on its design, you can run this stove with canisters inverted, and that means they work really well in the cold. From what I can tell, this is a repurposed MSR SimmerLite, which is a white gas stove. Now this is only a canister stove. You can't do anything with it besides burn normal camping propane butane mixed canisters. Great little stove. I've had it for years. It always performs really well in my hands, and I've used it in very cold conditions, and it works really well. The MSR WhisperLite Universal is essentially this stove, which is the International, with a slightly modified fuel hose where you can unscrew this part here, which is the part that goes into a fuel pump, unscrew this, and then put on an adapter, which is very similar to the one that's on the MSR WindPro. Allows you to connect a canister and burn propane butane canisters. Just to be clear, because I look at things like this adapter won't fit on, at least I don't think it will fit on the Universal, because the Universal, being a version of the WhisperLite, my understanding is that it has a larger fuel line, and they have a cleaning wire inside them. So they're pretty beefy tubing here compared to this one, which is quite a bit narrower and I think has a different connection than what you'd find on the Universal. Basically, it boils down to what you're going to be using the stove for. Overall, they're very similar designs. They have the same collapsing mechanism. They just rotate around to collapse. WindPro packs down quite a bit smaller, and just because of the fuel line, I find you can get this into a pretty small pot. The WhisperLite weighs in at 8.7 ounces, this one in my hands. The WindPro weighs in at 6.7 ounces, and that's with this adapter screwed on. So if you look at the specs for the MSR Universal versus International, the specs say something like 11.2 ounces, which I think include multiple parts like the pump and things like that. So if you were to put the Universal in propane mode, that you would get a slightly heavier version, because you'd be taking off one part and putting on kind of a beefy valve. So maybe it weighs in at 9 or 9.5 ounces. You have a little bit of a weight savings with the dedicated canister stove, so maybe 2 or up to 3 ounces weight saving. You have slightly more compact. You also have a different burner style, so the nice kind of ported burner versus the side jet style of the MSR WhisperLites. When you're using these to melt snow, which is what I use them for, I don't think it has a huge impact. If you're trying to cook meals and do like nice sauteing and fancy backcountry meals, this is just an assumption. My assumption is that this one will give you a little bit more control and things like that. But overall, they are very, very, very similar stoves and probably perform very similarly. And I'm saying that just because this stove burning white gas and this stove burning propane use essentially the same amount of fuel to melt and bring 2 liters of water to boil. So I've tested those side by side. There's no real performance difference. What you do have is a big cost difference. This one retails for $190 Canadian, and the Universal not the international, so the universal, retails for something like $290. So the question is, how often are you going to need that universal feature? Are you literally going to go on a trip and bring this stove with all of the parts that you're going to need to convert it from one type of fuel to another? Are you going to be going up into northern Canada, Yukon, or Alaska and literally be thinking about burning kerosene, gasoline, white gas, and canisters? In my mind, at least the way I go about it, is that you'll probably be burning liquid or canister. Do you really want to spend that extra $100 to have a stove that you can convert from one to the other? How often are you going to be making that switch? That's really only up to you who can decide. You know, if I was going to be going on a trip where I thought I might be switching back and forth between the two, it could even be worthwhile to bring a little upright canister stove, something like the BRS 3000 that weighs probably as much as this adapter. If I was going to go out and buy these stoves, which I did, you know, I bought this one myself and I bought this one myself. I just go with two different stoves, and then I'm not having to say, okay, you know, before a trip I have to do the switch. I think you have to change the fuel connector, and you also have to change the nozzle, if I'm not mistaken. So I think, I could be wrong again, that the universal comes with potentially three nozzles. So a white gas, naphtha, gasoline nozzle, a kerosene nozzle, and a propane nozzle. So you're switching out a lot of stuff. You're having to take the stove apart, and before trips and things like that, it can be a little bit of a hassle. So not really something that I feel like doing all the time. I like to just be able to say, okay, I've got my stove there. I just grab and go. I'm doing a winter trip. I'm using white gas or liquid gas, and I'm ready to go. Or I'm going out, I'm taking canisters, and I'm using this stove. So that's just, you know, my 2 cents on it. If you do like this style of video, it's not something that I normally do, just kind of an off-the-cuff, quick video. Let me know in the comments and like the video. You can also check out my video on the WindPro and my video on why I use liquid fuel stoves in the winter.